to meeting number 80 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today we are meeting in public to discuss committee business. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have not successfully completed the required connection test in advance of this meeting. But we do have quorum here fully today with everybody here in attendance. So where we on previously suspended, Mr. Angus had the floor and we had resumed debate on the sub-amendment of Mr. Falk. So Mr. Angus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're now 6 meetings into my attempt to have the floor so I can carry out my basic function as a parliamentarian, which is to participate in legislation that was voted in the House and passed to our committee, and so is a priority for our committee to address. The motion being that we've had so much monkey business, people might forget what we were actually discussing. I'm going to read the motion and then just explain why we need to address these. The motion that was brought by the Liberal government for debate of the parties, that given Bill C-50, an act respecting accountability, transparency, and engagement to support the creation of sustainable jobs for workers and economic growth in a net zero economy, and Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act, and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and make consequential amendments to other acts, have both been referred to the committee. That the committee initiate its consideration of both C-50 and C-49 with the following schedule. That the ministers and officials be invited to appear before committee on Bill C-50 on a date determined by the chair, but no later than November 8th, 2023. I will stop there for November 8th, which we've passed because of the monkey business that was going on with the Conservatives. So the minister who could have come and explained his position was not given that opportunity, and I, as an opposition member, was not given the opportunity to cross-examine the minister. That the minister and officials be invited to appear before the committee on C-49 on a date determined by the chair, but no later than Wednesday, December 6, 2023. So we haven't crossed that date yet, but it's moving up on us. That members submit their list to suggested witnesses concerning C-50 by 12 p.m. on Friday, November 3rd, 2023, which we have done as New Democrats. And the chair, clerk, and analysts create witness panels which reflect the representation of the parties on the committee, and once complete, that the chair begins scheduling these meetings. That members submit their lists of suggested witnesses concerning C-49 by 12 p.m. on Friday, November 10th, 2023, and that the chair, clerk, and analysts create witness panels which reflect the representation of the parties on the committee, and once complete, that the chair begin scheduling those meetings. That the chair seek additional meeting times and that the meetings be scheduled if resources are available for up to 3 hours each. That the chair issue press releases for C-50 and C-49, inviting written submissions from the public, establishing a deadline for submissions. That the committee hold at least 4 meetings with witnesses on C-50 before clause-by-clause consideration for C-50 is scheduled. That the committee hold at least 4 meetings with witnesses on C-49 before clause-by-clause consideration for C-49 is scheduled, and that the chair sets deadlines for the submission of proposed amendments for C-50 and C-49 in advance of the beginning of their respective clause-by-clause considerations, but no sooner than after the completion of the respective witness meetings for each, and that the members of the committee, as well as members who are not part of a caucus represented on the committee, submit to the clerk all of their proposed amendments to C-50 and C-49 no later than 5 p.m. on the respective dates established by the chair in both official languages, and these be distributed to the members. So that's what we set out to discuss, I believe, 6 meetings ago.
Mr. Angus, if I could ask you to hold, we have a point of order. If you just pause 1 second. We have a point of order from Mr. Patzer. Go ahead, Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Angus, for reading the original motion. I'd also just want to remind committee members that there is a substantive amendment from the Conservatives to the motion. And
Point of order?
do you want me to read that in just as well, so that way we can get that in there, or?
So, on the point of order, we have a point of order by Mr. Angus.
That's the floor.
But I thought we were going to finish points of order before we got to the next point of order.
If your point of order is on directly on the procedural issue,
It is.
you can raise it, and then we can move on. So,
Mr. Chair?
but we do have a point of order. I do, and I appreciate you pausing, because the member, based on what you've just said, has also initiated a point of order. So I'm going to ask you to hold for 1 sec, so we can hear the point of order by Mr.
Well, Chair,
Angus.
the fact is I have the floor.
That's
and
why,
as I have the
and I
floor-
raised a point of order. It's not a big deal. Don't
So,
shush me.
Colleagues, I'm going to ask everybody to hold right now, because this is extremely important.
Yeah.
Multiple mics turning on at the same time for debate on who has the floor or who does not have the floor is an issue. At previous meetings, I've clearly stated that the chair will recognize the speaker, and that when my mic turns on, this red light turns on, and I really try to pause and wait so I don't have to cut you off. What we cannot do is have multiple mics and multiple committee members speaking at the same time. I'm going to remind everybody why. For health and safety concerns that I as chair have, and I know all of you committee members have for interpreters who are doing a tremendous job, it is a challenge for interpreters to interpret effectively, but also it is a challenge and can pose a risk for health and safety on the interpreter. So before we proceed, I thought this was a good time to provide this intervention specifically on this issue. So I'm hoping everybody, all sides of the table, as a reminder before we move forward, is when I turn on my mic, the light comes on, try to get my attention. When I get the individual to pause, if there is a point of order, I will recognize the individual. So I'm not having my mic on while others have their mic on, but I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that I recognize members. But I do also, if I do turn on my mic and I do not get your attention, I will have to ask you to pause. So based on that, Mr. Angus, I'm going to ask you to just finish your point of order on the procedural issue. And then we have a point of order from Ms. Stubbs.
Then do I get to finish mine?
Well, so once again, I'll recognize a member to come back, but Ms. Stubbs also has a point of order. So Mr. Angus, procedurally on the point of order, then I'm going to go to the point of order of Ms. Stubbs has on Mr. Angus's point of order.
Well, it's very simple, Chair. I have the floor, so I'm discussing the motion. Mr. Patzer is attempting to interfere and undermine by saying that he wants to talk about something else. Sorry, I need to finish this because of the abusive behavior of Mr. Patzer and his immaturity.
Mr. Angus,
I have the floor.
thank you, Mr. Angus, on your point of order. I'm going to go to Ms. Stubbs on the point of order first, and then I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Patzer, on the point of order. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I guess you'll enlighten me as to whether or not I'm asking this question appropriately. Certainly Conservatives support and value the expertise and the objective service of our clerk and of the interpreters, of the analysts, and all of the support staff for committees. We are, of course, also deeply concerned about any impacts on health and safety in the workplace. Could someone clarify if the logistical challenge is the ability to translate comments when mics are competing, and if there is a distinction between the ability to deliver on the core function of interpretation versus concerns about physical health and safety in the workplace?
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs, for your point of order. If you just give me a moment, I'll get clarification. Thank you, Ms. Stubbs, for your point of order and for clarification. Yes, when multiple mics are on, it is difficult for the interpreters to translate effectively for committee, but it also does pose a health and safety concern. So it's a concern for both, for interpretation, but also health and safety of our interpreters when multiple mics are on. Thank you for your point of order. Do you have another that deals with that point of order?
I do related to that, Chair. We of course have heard different information, so I wonder if we have heard that the primary challenge is the ability for interpreters to effectively translate and therefore do their jobs effectively that we all know they are 100% dedicated to. So is there a way for us to have, written or from the Clerk of the House of Commons or Head Clerk clarification on this issue?
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs, for your point of order. We have a point of order by Mr. Bruson. Go ahead, Mr. Bruson.
I believe the issue is that it's disrespectful to the interpreters, and from my perspective, I think that we can all agree that we shouldn't all be speaking over each other. I don't think we need to go far down that road, but Mr. Angus has had the floor now for, I believe, almost 3 weeks. We've been trying to get through his argument on a sub-amendment to the motion. He was going through that motion, and I would really like the opportunity to hear from Mr. Angus and finally give him the floor. If no one is challenging the chair on the fact that Mr. Angus actually does have the floor, 16 hours in, I believe it's time that we go back to Mr. Angus and allow him to complete his argument.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. I do have a point of order. I have a point of order by Monsieur Simard on. Hold on. We have Monsieur Simard raise a point of order on Mr. Bruson. Mr. Patzer, I do have you recognized on the original point of order on Mr. Angus, but we're in a whole other list of point of orders. Monsieur Simard raised a point of order based on what Ms. Stubbs said and what Mr. Bruson has said. So I'm going to go to Monsieur Simard, then I'm going to come back. Go ahead, Monsieur Simard.
Simplement pour.
Well, quite simply to agree with my colleague Shannon, you don't have the experience when the translation is going from French, and I'm not going to be trying to shout over 5 or 6 other people. So, listen, common sense will tell you it's impossible if one is trying to do the interpretation to interpret 5 or 6 people simultaneously. So it's easy when someone is given a floor and is the only speaker, but when more than one is speaking, given their skills, I think it would be more appropriate to just allow the person recognized by the chair to speak. So when there's more than one person is speaking at a time, I can't make sense of who's saying what. So worse for the interpreters. So one cannot interpret 6 individual voices at once.
Thank you, Monsieur Simard. Now, we had a point of order. I just want to be a point of order, Ms. Stubbs. You had a point of order. I'm going to go to Mr. Patzer as well. So go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
Chair, I just want to say thank you for offering the opportunity for this clarity around interpretation and translation, and also to Mr. Simard for his clarity about, obviously, the complications. It does make common sense, as he says, that it would be difficult to interpret multiple people talking at the same time in multiple mics. I myself experienced childhood physical abuse, and of course, after 8 years, all of you will know that I'm a strong advocate for victims of crime, victims of abuse, particularly concerned around the health and safety of individuals, vulnerable women, vulnerable people everywhere. I just wanted to raise this concern because I'm deeply concerned about the use of language of abusive and abusive behavior, as well as any potential concerns about the health and safety for interpreters. I guess particularly in the light of that work that I guess my own personal experiences as well. I'm sure that we all have loved ones who have faced different degrees of violence. I also lost a childhood best friend to murder in 2011 after she did face repeated violence and physical abuse from a domestic partner at that time. And so I just am raising this issue because it is one that conservatives are concerned about deeply in terms of health and safety in the workplace, as well as the language that is being used here in a very, in my view, casual way about members of parliament in this developed country, in this free democracy, as we all seek to do the best that we can, advocating for the people who have elected us and for the public interest of Canadians right across the country. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. And I will, from a previous point of order and also just on one that's been raised by many, the interpreters will let us know if they have concerns about their health and safety as they arise through a meeting when multiple mics do turn on. Several meetings ago, I raised this to committee members and constantly remind committee members of this health and safety concern because it was raised through conversation we did have with interpreters several meetings ago. Now, I would like to say today's meeting, I think we've so far moved very well, and it's nice to have that reminder because I know all of us have come off a constituency week of where we were and where we're moving forward. So I appreciate all committee members' concern about health and safety, and we will proceed forward. But I do want to go to Mr. Patzer because you did have a point of order, and then I hope to resume our debate on the sub-amendment which we were on when Mr. Angus had the floor. So, Mr. Patzer, go ahead on, just finish your point of order so we can go back to where we were.
Yeah, well, okay, so this is a separate point of order from my original one because building off of what my colleague, Mrs. Stubbs, just said in regards to using the term abuse so flippantly as Mr. Angus is doing here. I mean, we are simply here as elected members of Parliament doing our job. Because I had a simple point of order does not mean that I am engaging in abusive conduct towards the member from Timmins James Bay. And when he alleges that, he is directly and deliberately undermining people who are actually legitimately suffering and going through abuse this very day. And I think it's absolutely appalling that he would dare to bring that language into this committee. He needs to apologize and withdraw that. I know he doesn't agree with me on my point of order, which is fine, but because he simply disagrees with me does not mean that I am being abusive to him. I think that is absolutely ridiculous. And Mr. Chair, I would ask you to be judicious in the way that you monitor this committee and make sure that members are not belittling and undermining people who are legitimately going through and
Mr.
suffering
Patzer,
from abuse. Thank you.
Thank you for your point of order. Mr. Angus has a point of order. And Mr. Angus, you do have the floor, but I want to go to you. Thank you for being patient.
No, Chair, how about this? I have the floor.
Yes.
I will speak. I don't need to keep engaging with this, what is turning into a gong show. It's like a Monty Python sketch without the humor. I've been over 6 meetings attempting to speak on a motion. So I have the floor. I will continue to speak. I don't need a point of order to speak when I have the floor. Is that not correct?
You do have the floor, Mr. Angus.
Thank you.
And Mr. Brewson does have a point of order on Mr. Patzer's point of order. So I just want to go to Mr. Brewson.
Go to Mr. Brewson, and then we'll go back to me.
Let's go to...
You're not the chair, Charlie. Just remember that.
All right, folks. Once again, I know the mics were off, but let's work together as committee members here, and let's try to talk to your colleagues, but let's not also engage in conversations across the floor, just so we can all focus on the work at hand. Mr. Brewson, please go ahead on your point of order, if you still have a point of order, so I can go back to where we were.
Mr. Chair, we're nearing 16 and a half hours now that you made a decision that Mr. Angus had the floor, and he has yet to be able to take the floor to complete his argument. And I would say once again, if the members opposite want to challenge the chair's decision, they are free to do so. But we are at this point engaging in all sorts of side conversations that are not getting us closer to what we really want to do, which is to make sure that workers have a seat at the table when we're talking about sustainable jobs in the Canadian economy, and that we develop offshore wind in our Atlantic provinces, creating jobs for Atlantic Canadians. This is important for our economy, it's important for workers, and I would ask that we go back to Mr. Angus, please, and let him have his say on the sub-amendment to the motion.
Okay, so before, Mr. Angus, before you
much.
proceed, if I could ask you to hold, we had an original point of order that was point of ordered. I just want to give Mr. Patzer the opportunity. Mr. Patzer, I would just focus on the procedural aspect of your point of order so we can return back to the order we were in with Mr. Angus having the floor. So please go ahead on your point of order if you had anything else to finish when the point of order had occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Mr. Angus started the meeting with the floor. He was not interrupted until he finished reading the motion, but he conveniently left out the amendment that the Conservatives have put forward to make sure that C49 is actually given precedent first, so that we could we want to undertake a study on C69, but of consequence, we want C49 to go ahead of C50 for the sake of ordering, right? So I just want to make sure that all committee members remember that C49 should come ahead of C50, and we would like to see C49 first. Thank you.
Mr. Patzer, that's not a point of order on procedurally and where we're at. I do want to remind committee members where we are at, though. I think this is a great opportunity, just for a quick refresh, is we had a motion that was brought forward and placed on the floor by Mr. Cervera, where we started. Then we had an amendment that was placed. Then we had a sub-amendment that has been placed, at which currently we're on the sub-amendment of Mr. Falk on the importance of Timmins. And so that's where we are at. Now, Mr. Angus does have the floor and did start today on providing his rationale on the sub-amendment. And so now that we've gone through all the point of orders, I think the stage is set for where we are moving forward. Everybody has a clear understanding. We are on the sub-amendment, and I am going to proceed to Mr. Angus on the sub-amendment. I'm hoping, colleagues, unless you have a procedural issue, that we don't use point of orders for debate, but we focus on the procedural issue that you may have. So, Mr. Angus, the floor is yours. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have to say I'm absolutely not surprised that I was interrupted just even trying to read the motion, because what this motion instruction is about getting, number one, C50, what is very important legislation about having workers at the table for the transition that's happening. And every time we've tried to bring workers here, we've seen gong show tactics from the Conservatives that have stopped them from speaking. So I'm not surprised that they're trying to interrupt this important work. Now, when the Carpenters Union came, we had Conservative gong show. They didn't speak. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers came. Gong show tactics from the Conservatives. They didn't let them speak. They represent so many people in the oil patch, and they have so much to say. So I'm not surprised that we're dealing with these constant games to stop legislation that is about making sure that workers have a right to be here, because they have stopped
Mr. Angus,
workers speaking every moment.
I'm going to have to interrupt you because we have a point of order from Mr. Falk.
Yeah, and this is a point of order, Mr. Chair. You just, I think, very clearly outlined where this committee was at, that there's a motion on the floor from Mr. Cervera, there was an amendment made, and then there's a sub-amendment. And that sub-amendment is that we invite representatives from the riding of Timmins James Bay to come to committee and be witnesses here. And I think Mr. Angus is forgetting the sub-amendment that we're actually speaking to at the moment. And if he could actually use his time instead of criticizing everything that we've done up until this point and actually speak to the sub-amendment, which is bringing the witnesses to committee.
So thank you, Mr. Falk, on your point of order. Mr. Angus, you do have the floor on the sub-amendment. I think you've heard the point of order on pertaining to you having the floor and focusing on the sub-amendment. And so I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's interesting because, again, we have not been able to discuss this at all without the Conservatives losing their minds on this, interrupting, demanding that I speak on what they want me to speak about. I am here to speak about important legislation, two pieces of legislation, C-50 and C-49. C-50 is essential that we move this forward. What we've seen are interference by the Conservatives to discuss other things, to move ahead, to ignore something that was moved in legislation. C-49 is absolutely essential because we're dealing with the need to be able to compete in the maritime East Coast when we're losing out to the Biden administration. That is something that the Conservatives don't want us to talk about. So I'm not surprised that they are interfering and attempting to, again, play gong show games here.
Mr. Angus, I'll ask you to hold.
Certainly.
We have a point of order from Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk, if you keep it the point of order to the procedural issue at hand.
The procedural issue, and I'll say it again, Mr. Chair, is you've outlined very clearly to this committee what it is that we are to be debating at this moment. And we're debating the sub-amendment to the amendment to the motion. Mr. Angus is consumed with speaking about everything else but the sub-amendment. The sub-amendment pertains to bringing witnesses in from his riding to speak to the whole issue.
Of what?
So, thank you, Mr. Falk.
I keep getting interrupted.
Thank you, Mr. Falk, on your point of order. You made the same point of order previously. I will I will ask the member to.
Point of order, Chair.
So I'm going to, at first, we have a main motion on the floor. We have an amendment, and then we have a sub-amendment. The member so this is a main motion, an amendment to the main motion, and a sub-amendment to the main motion. So the member does have the floor to make his argument on the sub-amendment and how it relates to the main motion on the floor. So I would ask colleagues to use your time effectively to make your argument and why you support or don't support potentially the sub-amendment, and provide your arguments so committee members have that rationale, which may also impact their decisions on why they want to support or not support the sub-amendment. So I would ask all members to allow the member to continue on to finish his debate on this issue so we can move to other members who also may want to add in and provide debate on this. Now, Mr. Patzer, you had a point of order?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I mean, you have talked to all committee members at length about being respectful to their colleagues. And while Mr. Falk was talking, Mr. Angus was yelling at him from that end of the table. Over top of him, yes, you were, and I just want to make sure that we put that on the record because he is the one who is quick to point out that members are being abusive, but yet here he is being the one who is yelling at other members. So I just want to remind you, Mr. Chair, that the rules apply to everyone, and I would ask that you make sure Mr. Angus is not the one also who is providing cross-talk and yelling over top of people. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your point of order. Colleagues, I have asked all members to, number one, not speak with multiple mics on. I know many of you colleagues do like to converse with each other. To keep that, so you can do that because you have the right to do that, to converse with your colleagues, but that we keep the decorum of this committee focused on doing the work for Canadians at the committee and of the amendments and the motion, amendment, and sub-amendment we've provided today, and we do not engage into debate that does not pertain to what we're doing, and really focus on that. So,
Chair, can I get a ruling from you? Was I yelling?
So yes, I'm going back to you, Mr. Angus.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have the floor, but what I'm seeing is that this continual attempt to get on the record falsehoods from the Conservatives, to make stuff up, to undermine. So I want a ruling. Was I yelling? Was I yelling in this committee?
So I have not heard you. You've asked about yourself, Mr. Angus. I have not heard you yelling. And what I've made comments to earlier is not about you or any one member specifically, unless I've stated that specifically about a member, and I have not. What I've asked all members is to avoid turning on the mics, speaking at the same time, speaking loudly into the mics where multiple mics are on, or having debate when the mics are off that is louder across the table, because it does make it difficult for committee members to focus on what the member who has the floor is saying and doing. So I think that's something we can all abide by to keep the tone of this committee focused and really focused on the work at hand of the motion on that was presented by Mr. Cervera. So I think we're going to go back now. I know we're going to go back to you, Mr. Angus, who have the floor. I would ask you to go ahead and continue your arguments on. We do have a point of order from Ms. Stubbs on where we are at. So, Ms. Stubbs, I'm going to go to you on the point of order.
Thanks, Chair. I just have a bit of confusion, or how we can get some, evenness in terms of committee members' responses for decisions. I recall at a recent meeting, our colleague Garnet Jennis was accused of both lying and unparliamentary language. He asked for clarity, much like Mr. Angus just did. And I have a out of a certain level of self-awareness, I just want to put on the record that I have a high threshold for volume, because I am a loud talker, as you all know. But my colleague, Mr. McKay, is shaking his head in agreement, I think. But I guess I just wonder, why Mr. Angus's request for subjective clarity from the chair was answered immediately, and our colleague Garnet Jennis couldn't seem to get similar support for clarity on allegations of lying and unparliamentary language when he simply requests specificities to which to respond.
Well, thank you for your point of order. Now, just 1 second, Ms. Stubbs. Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I don't recall from several meetings back on that specific issue that you have brought forward, but I would remind members that implying that a member is lying is unparliamentary, and we should refrain from doing that. We should be courteous to each other here at our committee and try to work together, right? And if there are challenges we have, I think there's ways to do that within our parliamentary procedures and processes we have. Now, Mr. Angus and Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, I have you first, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Angus, on the point of order. But go ahead, Mr. Patzer.
Well, thank you very much. Multiple times Mr. Angus has tried to imply that we have been lying over here or providing misinformation, things like that. So I would ask that you be judicious in making sure that that applies to all members, especially as it pertained to me just a couple minutes ago here, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. And I'll remind colleagues, and that's why I just wanted to clarify and make that statement, that we should not be accusing members here of lying, but we should be courteous and focus on the work at hand. So thank you, and I will go back to you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, did you have a point of order? I just want to make sure it's in the point of order, or just the floor is back to you now.
If I'm allowed to speak, I will continue to speak.
So the floor is yours, Mr. Angus, and I'll let you. And I
begin by thanking you, Chair. I did feel it was important to get that ruling, because I feel what's being done has been. I do believe that deliberate falsehoods are being put on the record to monkey wrench this committee. And
Point of order,
I was
Mr. Chair.
very pleased that you had ruled that I had not made a false statement, as was claimed by my Conservative colleagues. So I thank you for that, because the public record is important.
Mr. Angus, we have a point of order from Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order.
Well, I mean, let's just be clear. When Mr. Angus alleges falsehoods and things like that, we deliberately know what he's doing. He's deliberately saying that we are lying. Now, there was no falsehood that was said, and yet here he is right there deliberately defying what you literally had just told him 20 seconds ago, to not accuse people of lying, right? So I just ask, Mr. Chair, that when members do that, that you would make sure that they are stopped, asked to apologize, because we know that they're not allowed to do that in the House of Commons. We know that members are, whenever there's somebody accuses somebody of lying, they're not allowed to continue until they apologize.
So, Mr. Patzer, I've acknowledged your point of order. That point of order was raised by Mr. Angus. I clarified what Mr. Angus asked for a ruling on, and I gave him the floor, back to the floor. I've told all members, once again, not to target other members or say they are lying. Members do have the right through their debate to debate the motions at hand. So Mr. Angus did get the floor back. I did provide a ruling. He did get the floor back on the ruling that was provided, and now he's proceeding back to his debate. So, Mr. Angus, I will go back to you now on debate, because we've addressed the point of order. If colleagues do want clarity once again, I think I've provided it multiple times on that ruling and decision. If you want clarity, I can re-provide it again, but I think committee members do understand on where we're at. So before you proceed, Mr. Do you have, no, you don't, okay, just wanted to make sure, Mr. Smart. Go ahead, Mr. Angus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And we will continue to push forward on this because this legislation has to get passed. You know, this committee had 56 meetings with 133 witnesses, over 112 hours of testimony. We know what the energy file is. We know what the sustainable jobs issue is. We need to get this legislation passed. We are hearing from labor groups across the country who are very concerned. I'm hearing from investors who are looking to shift investment to the United States because they see that Canada is becoming a gridlock with the Conservatives blocking C-49 when there's such opportunities. So to that, this motion that I read, that the first, my attempt to speak on this, was referred to us because two pieces of legislation were referred to our committee. And as someone who's been in Parliament for multiple years, and in opposition all that time, I don't always agree with how government works, but I know that when government moves legislation to the committee, it becomes the priority of the committee. The committee has to address that legislation. What we saw from the Conservatives was an attempt to monkey wrench that motion on C-50 and C-49 by introducing another study on top of that, which, you know, I had reached out to the Conservatives and said I'd be more than willing to look at that study, but that study would have to come in order. It doesn't get to preempt the work that has been given to us by Parliament. And there is a timeline ticking on this. We need to get this done because this is what we're hearing from Labour. And then we've had a series of these amendments that are very, to me, it's, you know, first it was Sudbury. So suddenly we're going to have people from Sudbury. It wasn't really clear what we were going to have from Sudbury, but we were going to get somebody from Sudbury. And the Conservatives suddenly were really fascinated. It's funny, you know, they didn't have anybody come, like when the coal transition happened, it was New Democrats who brought representatives who went through the coal transition. They didn't bring anybody. Suddenly they wanted someone from Sudbury. Now they want, and I believe the motion was they wanted representatives of the mining industry in Timmins, which I think is a great idea. I would love to have a set of meetings with the representatives of the mining region of Timmins, maybe Val-d'Or, maybe Sudbury, but outside of this meeting of C-50 and C-49, because it would certainly be a huge education to my Conservative colleagues. If they think that the mining representatives from Northern Ontario are going to come down and back their climate-denying anti-investment in EV technology, I think they're going to be in for a big surprise. You know, we have Alamos Gold in Matachewan that's running 8,000 tons a day gold underground. That's massive. When I go underground at Alamos, we talk about the really important need to move from diesel to electric trucks. That's a huge investment. Those ITC tax credits will be huge for being able to move those kind of underground pit trucks to battery. The Newmont mine, I would love to invite Newmont to come and talk about Borden. Borden is a mine that's running almost entirely green now. It is possible, and again, something my Conservative colleagues would not probably know anything about, but when you work underground and you work in a diesel environment and you work with oil from the drills, the lung cancer, stomach cancers are enormous just from what you're breathing. When you go into a clean battery-driven mine, the air is so much cleaner, and what it does is it drops your costs enormously. So what you pay in the battery investments, you actually make in the less costs for underground fans, because you're having to run fans, say, Creighton Deep, 9,000 feet underground. You're pumping a lot of cool air down at those depths. So when you're running diesel motors down at that depth, you have to really run heavy fans. So when I talk to mining representatives, and I'm sure they would love to come to this committee to talk about how ITC would help in those investments so that we could make switches. For example, I believe Vale, which is not in my region, but it's in my Ms. LaPointe's region, they're running 72-ton haulage trucks now on batteries. That's a really transformative moment. People didn't think that was possible, and certainly the flat Earth EV deniers would say that you couldn't run trucks that big. But what they can do now is, because of how they've tied the batteries to the braking energy on those pit trucks, they can run from 6 hours to 10 hours. So a 10-hour shift on a battery hauling 72-ton ore is a major transformative moment. I would love to have them come and talk about that technology and why they are absolutely committed to the clean tech future, because they see it, the opportunities for mining. And whenever I talk to people in the mining sector, they get it. If we're going to be competing against China and Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's horrific human rights abuses, we need to have a supply chain that is free of the horrific abuses that are happening in places like Congo, but also that has a clean energy footprint, because we can't say we're going to be a clean energy superpower and get critical minerals unless our mines are able to start running on clean energy. So that leads to questions of the grid. And I know, Chair, when you were sitting as just one of the members, we were going to study the grid, something my Conservative colleagues don't seem to want to deal with. But the grid is important because we actually can't move some of this battery technology for big industrial projects without dealing with issues of the grid. So I think it would be really great to have representatives of the Timmins mining industry. They would also explain to the Conservatives that Bill C-69, it has really nothing to do with how mine projects are developed. And I know Conservatives are going, it takes 10 to 15 years to get a mine up and running. And they blame the Liberal government for that. Well, it always takes 10 to 15 years for a mine, because when you're talking about a multi-million-dollar investment underground, you have to make sure you really, really know where you're putting your infrastructure. You put the shaft in the wrong place, you're going to go bankrupt pretty quick. And you're not going to be able to raise the money on the international market until you've done all the important steps that are necessary. Take Doug Ford. Doug Ford announced he was going to run a bulldozer through the Ring of Fire. Well, that didn't go so well. I wouldn't be betting any money on the Ring of Fire right now, because it was Conservative politicians who shot their mouth off about the Ring of Fire. You go to Nescandiga First Nation, they're saying it ain't going to happen because it's not done properly. To build a mine properly, you have to have a proper environmental plan. You have to have a proper financial plan. You have to have the support of First Nations, because when you've got support of First Nations, things move a lot quicker. For example, I'll tell you, and if we had
Mr.
representatives
Angus,
from the Timmins mining region come.
I will ask you to hold. We have a point of order from Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, go ahead on the point of order.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just relative to your points earlier about being judicious and accurate in our comments about each other and our work here in the committee. Of course, Mr. Angus would know that we supported the study that is ongoing on the electricity grid, on efforts to decarbonization. In fact, Conservatives have proposed more work on, as a first step, the progress of interties between provinces and north to south. So I wouldn't want to accuse a fellow colleague of spreading falsehoods, but that allegation about Conservatives not interested in the work on the grid is such. Secondly, the claim, too, that you won't find a First Nation that supports the Ring of Fire is just absolutely flagrantly false. Given that, for example, there are 2 First Nations communities who are proposing
we are getting into
infrastructure specifically to be able to access the Ring of Fire, and there are a number of First Nations-led proposals in the Ring of Fire, and of course that's all being held up by the red tape development of the regional assessment plans, which aren't complete yet. So
I would ask you to
again,
hold.
I wouldn't accuse colleagues of spreading falsehoods here at the committee, but that claim is false too.
Ms. Stubbs, I don't want to cut you off. I would just, let's not use point of orders for debate. If you'd like to debate if you would like to debate, Mr. Angus does have the floor to debate the sub-amendment. I just want to make sure that all colleagues, as a reminder, is to point of order on the procedural issue you have. If there is a procedural issue, make your procedural issue, and then we can move on to back to what we're discussing. And I do have Mr. Patzer on that point of order, Ms. Stubbs, and then you can. I'll go back to you on the point of order as well. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I am going to say that I am paraphrasing because I do not have your direct quote in front of me. But at a previous meeting, you had said that when a member has the floor on a point of order, as Ms. Stubbs did, that we're not going to be interrupting them because of the issue of crosstalk and the fact that there is multiple problems that come with it. So you had asked us previously, and I will be happy to stand corrected by you if I am wrong here, but that we would let points of order finish and then proceed to the next one, so that way we could maintain order, but also allow members to finish their points of order without being interrupted, because there's been a point of emphasis from you to make sure that we don't have crosstalk, excessive noise, and things like that. So when Mrs. Stubbs was giving her intervention, there were multiple attempts to try to cut her off and not allow her to finish her point of order. So I would be, I'd like to just know here what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. And I, as chair, did turn on my mic to allow Ms. Stubbs to finish her thought, but I did want to interject to let her know to use the point of order as a point of order, but not into extensive debate. I, as chair, will do that. I do not want to interrupt members mid-sentence so they can finish their thought, but I also do want to make sure that we can follow the rules and procedures we have here at committee, which is that the chair acknowledges the speakers, but to make sure that a point of order is focused on a point of order and not for further debate. And at times I do have to interject. So colleagues, once again, as a quick reminder, what I will do and what I normally like to do is when I feel like it's getting into debate or away, I turn on my mic as a first. I know sometimes folks have their head down looking at their notes or speaking to our colleagues around the room. I do not get your attention right away, and that's where I step in to ask you to pause. And I will continue to do that. And I'm hoping that's a good process that works. I think today it actually has been working well, and so I know we can continue, all of us, to make sure that happens. Now, yes, I have you, Ms. Stubbs. I do have Ms. Stubbs on a point of order, and then Mr. Angus, I have you as well. So I'm going to go to Ms. Stubbs on the point of order, and then I'm going to go to you, Mr. Angus. Go ahead, Ms. Stubbs, on the point of order.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just given your comments and also from the comments of my colleague, I did just want to clarify my aim in the point of order was specifically related to what you had been talking about procedurally this meeting, about alleging falsehoods and lying among members. And so I don't think that my interjection was that extensive, although I suppose we could start timing so that we have proof for it. But if I only used the examples that are publicly verifiable, that of course Conservatives do support the work on assessing all of the existing gaps, as well as required grid capacity towards electrification, and as well as the reality that that of course First Nations communities also support development in the Ring of Fire, and of course that C-69 is holding back the Ring
Ms.
of
Stubbs?
Fire because of the gatekeeping
Ms. Stubbs,
requirements for the regional assessments
I
that
will
are
ask
still
you
not
to
complete,
pause.
which is what's holding back the development in that region, supported by both
I would ask you-
Indigenous
I would
and
ask you to pause,
non-Indigenous
'cause we
communities
do
very
have a point of
strongly for
order.
those opportunities and jobs there.
Ms. DeBrusen,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as far as the point of order, first of all, I am noticing a repeated issue that is I do not see certain committee members respecting the fact that when your microphone is turned on, they must stop. That is something that you've ruled on now several times and warned us about, and yet time and again, what I see is people who are continuing, and Ms. Stubbs just did it twice, continuing to speak even after your microphone has turned on. So I'm going to ask again, for respect to our interpreters, that stop, but also that points of orders are being used to debate points that were raised with which people might disagree with the person who has the floor. And that's why we have a list of people who will be speaking in debate to this sub-amendment about bringing witnesses from Timmins, I believe is what the sub-amendment is. But we do not get to jump in on a point of order to talk about the motion or the sub-amendment itself. The floor is Mr. Angus's, and I would suggest that we try to move along so that we can actually vote on that sub-amendment, hopefully as quickly as possible.
okay, thank you, Ms. We have a point of order from Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order.
Well, based on what Ms. DeBrusen just said, but also by Mr. Angus's own admission, he was talking about somebody outside of Timmins James Bay.
Yeah.
So he wasn't speaking to the actual motion either. He was not on point, and even admitted that himself. Now, the other part is we were making sure that Mr. Angus was speaking on facts. Now, my colleague was just simply pointing out that here's what Conservatives have actually done, such as one is a motion that is in front of the committee. Now, not that it's the one that's being studied, but we want Mr. Angus to have the facts. Thank you.
Mr. Patzer, thank you for your point of order. Colleagues, if you want to debate the merits of, through the time you have on the floor, when you do get the floor, please go ahead, debate the merits of the motion and counter any arguments that may have been placed today through when you have the floor. That's why you can raise your hand, can put you on a speaking list, we can get you on to be able to participate moving forward. So I want to make sure that colleagues can finish their arguments, but if you do have a point of order that relates to a procedural issue, we can identify that and deal with it at the time. If you do want to engage in debate, you do that when you are recognized and have the floor. So now we have a point of order from Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, I would ask you just to focus on the point of order and try to avoid engaging in debate, and the floor is yours on the point of order.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So related to your procedural comments earlier about respecting each other and not alleging lying and falsehoods, I think Mr. Brusen emphasized that, and so have you. Then, the issues. I won't belabor it at this point, but as my colleague Mr. Patzer just articulated, that the issues that we raised previously and that I did just immediately so that your direction could be delivered on here about not alleging falsehoods or lying. How is it that, I just gave 3 instances which are not matters of opinion, but they're in fact publicly verifiable, just to prove to colleagues that I'm not just making this up as I go along, but there were 3 specific and very concise examples that are publicly verifiable facts. They're not matters of opinion or subjectivity. And so I endeavored to do that, not to get into the substance of the debate. You're surely right that there will be lots of opportunity for that, and we'll certainly exercise that time and that ability and responsibility we have as members of Parliament, as well as the official opposition. But how would you like then, if we are to help you deliver deliver successfully on your ruling about not alleging a lying, how would you like that to be done? I just thought a really short 3 examples of publicly verifiable facts would be a way to show that. Since we also do seem to face untrue allegations of, partisanship and so-called monkey business. So that's just why I had endeavored to give those short.
Thank you,
points.
Ms. Stubbs, on your point of order. The only thing I'd say is focus on the point of order and note the arguments that you may have, and place those arguments when you have the floor, and you can engage in that debate. But not to use point of orders to do that, to engage in debate. I am going to go to Mr. Angus. Before I go to back to you, I'm going to go to Monsieur Simard on a point of order. Go ahead, Monsieur.
Un point d'ordre.
Yes, very short, brief point of order so that it be clear to everyone. I understand that Mr. Grecian, Mr. Falk, Jeremy, and Ms. Stubbs have voting rights on this committee. And there is a procedure that reads, only voting members, as we have a lot of points of order, it's very laborious. I am going to oppose to any member who is not a voting member to raise a point of order. And perhaps we can decide on that as a part of our committee process. Only voting members of the committee should speak. And I would underline that since the 30th of October, almost a month now, the committee has not proceeded at all. So I'd like to remind my colleagues that we are not in camera. We are not in camera here. We're in a public meeting. Anybody observing our behavior might come to a conclusion that some members from time to time are of bad faith. So I don't think we should proceed in that fashion. So I would like to move, therefore, forward. Anyone who doesn't have a right to vote on this committee should not be allowed to intervene.
Thank you, Mr. Simard, for your point of order, and I'm just going to hold for a quick second here. Thank you, Mr. Simard. I'm actually just going to suspend for a moment at this point, and we will continue shortly. resuming our meeting. We had left with Monsieur Simard with a point of order and had raised a question on a point of order, which I'm just going to address that cannot be moved. A member can move when a member does have the floor, but it cannot be moved on a point of order. So members who are participating, who are voting members of the committee, are allowed to participate in a vote. Members can participate, and at the committee, if there's an objection from a committee member, they can raise that when they have the floor, not through a point of order. And at that time, the committee can decide based on the objection that's raised by the committee member at that time. I hope that provides clarity specifically on that. Mr. Patzer, you have a point of order? Okay, Mr. Patzer has a point of order on that. On the point of order or on Mr. Angus?
No, on your...
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, and just also the standing orders do say that members who are not of the voting members, but they either belong to another, maybe an independent member or a non-official party status member, or just other colleagues who aren't the main voting members, they are allowed to participate in a public committee meeting, just not vote, is what the standing orders allow for. But also, there's the other point too, though. We might be maybe we're going to be subbing in members to speak, and they want to get a spot on the list, but maybe we want to sub those members in before they get the floor. Other members don't know that, so I just want to make sure that we're protecting the rights and privileges of all members, regardless of political striping or whether they're a voting member or not.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, on that specific point of order. Members do have the right to participate. Members do have the right to be subbed in and participate as well. But a member of the committee, once they have the floor, also does have the right for a non-member who is a non-voting member at that time to object and participating in debate, if they so object and the committee supports that. So that's a conversation that if anybody from, if that's need to be had, I would ask committee members to do so at the appropriate time when they do have the floor. So thank you for your point of order, Mr. Patzer, and asking for the clarification and providing your context. We have I got a point of order from Mr. Janis, and I have a point of order from Mr. Angus. Mr. Janis, are you on the point of order of Mr. Patzer's point of order? And Mr. Angus, are you on? Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Angus on Mr. Patzer's point of order, and then we'll hold there.
Thank you. Well, since I have the floor, and has been recognized, that I do have the right then to object. So I'd like to know, is Mr. Janis subbed in? If he isn't, then I would object to his point of order.
So, thank you, Mr. Angus. I'll hold. I'm going to go to Mr. Patzer on the point of order.
You had just literally finished telling committee members that they cannot do that on a point of order. Mr. Angus raised a point of order, which meant that he does not, and that within that context, he does have the floor for the motion, but you had granted him the mic on a point of order, not returning to the debate of the substantive motion at hand, right? So therefore, Mr. Angus is not actually able and allowed to do that because it was only on a point of order, and now Mr. Janis actually has a point of order separately too.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Patzer. And just for clarification, so there's no misunderstanding on what I'm providing a ruling on earlier, which was we cannot move a motion pertaining to a member's participation who's a non-voting member at the committee on a point of order. We have to have the floor. So we would have to get back to the speaking order. Whoever has the floor or any other member at that time, if they feel necessary, can move that motion, but not off a point of order. So I hope that clarifies, just to make sure that everybody is up to speed, because I did go through it quite quickly. And I hope now that's clarified. So when a member does regain the floor, they can proceed with doing that. Now, with that clarity, Mr. Janis, you have a point of order.
Chair, I had wanted to participate earlier, but was having some technical issues. So now that I'm not virtual, that I'm here in person, I wanted to raise a point of order with respect to the important issue of health and safety of interpreters. You presented some information to the committee alleging that having multiple microphones engaged at the same time causes health and safety risks for interpreters. It is my understanding that is inaccurate. I wonder if the clerk could clarify if it is a health and safety issue for interpreters to have multiple microphones engaged at the same time. And I hope to get accurate information, the clerk is allowed to speak to the committee on that important health and safety issue, Mr.
So
Chair.
thank you, Mr. Janis, and welcome to the committee today. I know your attempts online to participate as well earlier, so thank you for joining us in person. Monsieur Simard, on the point of order.
J'aimerais simplement souligner à mon collègue qu'on a eu ce débat-là plus tôt. Je ne sais pas s'il était en transit entre l'aéroport et la colline parlementaire, mais on a eu ce débat-là plus tôt. On a vidé cette question. J'ai
Monsieur
souligné...
Simard, we don't have translation, so if you could...
Monsieur Simard, on n'a pas d'interprétation. Si vous pouviez attendre. Chers collègues.
Okay, Monsieur Simard, if you can just start with a few words.
Reprenez, s'il vous plaît. I just wanted to underline to my colleague that we've already had an ample discussion on that issue earlier. Perhaps it was in transit between the airport and Parliament Hill, but we've already debated this quite fully. I don't think that we should repeat the same arguments every 5 minutes. Every time a new member shows up, we'd have to repeat to put him up to speed. I think the floor belongs to Mr. Angus.
Mr. Janis, I'll ask you to hold until you're recognized. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simard, for raising that. This was addressed previously at this meeting today. We have had concerns from our interpreters on previous meetings that when multiple mics are on, it does pose a concern and a hazard to health and safety, which I've brought forward to this committee. So we had this conversation earlier today. It was brought forward to committee members. We had a lengthy conversation about this, and I think with that issue, we're going to move forward. So I'm going to...
Point of order, Chair. I want to hear from the clerk, because what you're saying isn't true. What you're saying isn't true, and that's why the clerk should be...
Mr. Janis, we are not going to use a point of order to debate me as the chair. We have provided you the context and information to committee members, and that was addressed earlier this meeting. So now I will go to the point of order that Ms. Stubbs has a point of order. So we have Ms. Stubbs and Mr. Sobera on the point of order. Ms. Stubbs, go ahead on the point of order if you still have a point of order. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on that note, I think that the reason Mr. Janis is raising this issue is because I did ask earlier about the distinction between people speaking into mics at the same time and its impact on the ability for translators to do their job function well, that I know they all want to do as they serve us as we represent our constituents and Canadians here. I think that what Mr. Janis is concerned with is that there has been repetition subsequent to that conversation relative to these claims about health and safety, which is the distinction I asked to be drawn earlier. And we have been advised that there are no impacts on the health and safety through competing voices in mics, that the problem, as Mr. Simard also articulated well and earlier, is about the ability for translators to do their jobs effectively here. as is their expertise and their responsibility. So again, I think in the context of us all respecting each other in our work here and maintaining order, and not unnecessarily inflaming either each other or drawing objective, nonpartisan servants of this committee of all kinds into what is our responsibility for our functions. I'll just finish if you don't mind. Our responsibility as through our functions as members of the committee on behalf of our constituents and all Canadians. I think that is what, that's the clarity that Mr. Genis is looking for, because we have been advised, including by extremely senior officials and professionals in this regard here in this organization, that it is in fact a matter of the ability for translation to happen seamlessly and with ease.
So thank you, Ms. Stubbs, for your point of order. It does pose a challenge for interpretation. That is one, and I've raised this and clarified this earlier. In a previous meeting, it was raised as a concern from the interpreters as well. So that's why we brought it forward, because it is a health and safety concern as well. And so that's been identified, that's been stated clearly at today's meeting and previously. I think we're good on that issue. We're going to move now to Monsieur Sabera on a point of order. Monsieur Sabera on the point of order.
Chair, as it is commonly known, many of us have obviously worked on committees for many, many years. My understanding in terms of the decorum, and I don't know if it's in the rules and procedures, is the floor is giving to a member when you recognize an individual, the chair recognizes the individual, independent of political party, independent of who the chair might be. It seems to me on occasion, and it's happened today, that folks like to say point of order and then start speaking before they're even recognized by the chair. I would hope that type of behavior stops. People can make their point of orders, and then when you recognize them via the clerk, and the clerk has written down their names and let you know. So I think we need to continue on that front. I think we all understand those rules and that decorum, and it allows our interpreters a flow of information. I would love to go back to the motion that I put forward. Unfortunately, it wasn't adopted that day, and I think in normal times it would be adopted quite easily. We would move on to both bills, one of them very, very important to the Atlantic provinces and to the people of Atlantic Canada, and the second one very important to all workers across Canada and all our ridings. I would love to see, believe the CPC has put forward a sub-amendment with regards to my motion. I would love to see that brought to a vote on the floor of this committee so we can move on that. And we all know that committees are, take the will of I'll finish up, committees are their mind of their own, or at least they should be, and we can go in that direction. But I do want to raise the first point on the decorum. People should not speak until they are recognized by the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cervera, and also waiting patiently to have your opportunity on the point of order. That is, colleagues, what I've asked everybody. We do our best to make sure we recognize all members when you raise your hand and get you down. And I'm not perfect by any means, and I try to do the best we can to look across the floor to get everybody here an opportunity to participate. But I would remind colleagues at this point, once again, point of orders should be used only for procedural issues to raise a point of order, not be used for debate on what you believe a member has said or not said. But if it's to a procedural issue, to use it for debate on the motion at hand. Try to be succinct on the point of order. I think that's an important piece, because we can sometimes verge into debate as well. So using a point of order to be succinct on the specific point of order, and so we can move forward. And if you do want to participate on the sub-amendment, let me know. I'll acknowledge you. I'll put you on the list, and you'll have your opportunity to debate the sub-amendment that's on the floor on Timmins. We do have another point of order before we go to you, Mr. Angus, on your, so you can wrap up your points on the sub-amendment, and others can speak because we do have others on the speaking list as well. So I'm going to go to Mr. Patzer on the point of order.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, just because there was a soft allegation put out there about decorum, I think we've all done a good job, really, of raising our point of order, but waiting to be acknowledged. So I just want to make sure that, we're not impugning integrity of individuals around here, but I just want to make it clear that we've done, I think, a very good job of making sure that we are respectful of the order as we raise the points of order, wait for you to acknowledge us, Mr. Chair. But yeah, I look forward to hearing Mr. Angus's closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. And I think that was a reminder. I would say today's meeting has been, from that perspective, I think we've learned and had the constituency week to think about the previous meetings. And sometimes a bit of a break at home helps us refocus. So I do appreciate everybody's effort here to work, what we've seen today, to work in the appropriate fashion. So I'm going to go to now Mr. Angus for the floor from where we started this meeting today to finish with your remarks.
Thank you. An hour and a half in, I hope I will be able to finally finish. And to that point, I certainly support the sub-amendment, but I would carve it out after we do this, because I think if the Conservatives are serious about dealing with mining issues, Indigenous issues, clean energy, I think representatives from the regions that I represent would be more than willing to correct the record in terms of the Ring of Fire. It's not Bill C-69 holding it up. It was the decision by Doug Ford to exclude Ibamtung and the Skandiga First Nation that caused the trouble, which resulted in a $95 billion lawsuit by Treaty 9 against the Ontario government, which is very problematic because we have multiple mining projects that are set to go ahead and will go ahead with good programming. So to end my comments...
Mr. Angus, before you end, we have a point of order by Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs on the point of order.
Mr. Chair, I was just mindful of what the Speaker was saying in the House Commons over the last little while about ensuring that issues and comments raised in the capacity of our roles as federal members of Parliament have to do with actual federal government policy. Certainly, there are example after example after example of this government's anti-private sector, anti-development, anti-energy, anti-resource policy, holding back
Stubbs,
clean tech, critical minerals,
Ms. Stubbs,
and LNG.
I would ask you on the point
but perhaps
of order.
you have some comments to share about boundaries around comments made about different levels of government that actually aren't our purview here federally in a federal committee.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I would ask members, and I think the member, this motion, this sub-amendment is on Timmins and the importance of, I think, what the member said on the mining industry and tying it into mining. If the member would like to conclude his remarks on where you're at, I will turn it over to Mr. Angus to finish up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's now past 12:30. It's still trying to just even say I was concluding without being interrupted, but I am concluding. But as I give up the floor, which I still have, I would support my colleague, Mr. Simard, that non-voting members not be recognized to speak without unanimous consent of the committee, and I believe that that is a non-debatable motion, and we should vote on that.
Okay. So we go right to a vote. Yes. So what Mr. Angus has brought forward is that members who are non-voting members, so that aren't subbed in, non-voting members, not be able to participate in the proceedings of the meeting is what he's brought forward, unless there is unanimous consent to do so through a vote. So we are, the member has asked for that. He has the right to do that, and it does go right to a vote.
Point of order, Chair.
It goes right to a vote.
That's a substantive motion, not a dilatory motion, as far as I understand it. Yes. Substantive motion when there's already a substantive.
Rather than a substantive one.
It is a, so we will go to a vote. It is a procedural motion that's been raised when the member had the floor. And so that can be raised.
Point of order, Chair. Where in the book does it say
So,
that this is a...
Mr. Janice, I would ask you not to turn on your mic.
Point of order.
Turn your mic off, please.
There is no point of orders. The member has asked for a vote, and we will proceed to
Yes,
a
there
vote.
are points of order.
No, it's a vote.
Chair, you're making things up again. It's a point of order.
It moves to a vote. You've called a vote.
So we can go by the raise of hands.
Point of order, Chair.
So
I have a point of order, Chair. You're bound by the rules.
The question is not.
okay.
Voting on you, Garnet.
So on the point of order, Mr. Janice, because we have not started the vote on the point of order.
Thank you, Chair. The motion that Mr. Angus has put forward, I believe is clearly a substantive motion. You said it's a dilatory motion. I would like to know what's where this allegedly dilatory motion is listed in the rules. Procedure and practice provides a pretty clear and limited number of dilatory motions. I think you'll find them on page 1168, but I'm working from memory there, so I might be off a little bit. But I believe it's on page 1168. There's motions like proceed to a certain matter, motions like adjourn debate. And in any event, even when it is a traditionally dilatory motion with a condition attached to it, for instance, adjourn debate until tomorrow, as soon as you attach a condition, it becomes a substantive motion. Mr. Angus said, provided a series of conditions in association with his motion. So frankly, although his motion would, I think, normally be substantive anyway, the attachment of conditions to it clearly makes it a substantive motion, which means it's debatable. Again, Mr. Chair, if you're seeking clarity on this, I would suggest you suspend or allow the clerk to speak on it. But you know, if you can't just make this up as you go along here. There's a rule book. You got to follow it, and it makes pretty clear that Mr. Angus's motion is a substantive motion, not a dilatory motion. So I would love to hear from the clerk. I'd love to hear the sections of the book cited, and I'll leave my comments there for now.
Well, I was telling the chair that indeed the fact that Mr. Angus moved that motion, but kind of added, he said something like, except by unanimous consent of the committee members, that indeed one can make the point that indeed it makes the motion now more debatable, that it adds kind of a requirement. So that was what I was telling the chair at this very moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to be added to the speakers list on his
Hold
motion.
on. So just to clarify, Mr. Angus had the floor. We have a number of point of orders. I would ask members not to turn on their mics. A member can move a motion when they have the floor, long as it's procedurally correct on how it's. So not a substantive one. So that's procedurally where we're at. So we, based on that, but I want to go to the other point of orders that are in place. We had a number of people with point of orders, and I don't see the folks. Point of order? Because okay, Ms. Tubbs, go ahead. I just wanted to make sure because I think another member had a point of order as well.
Oh, yeah, okay, maybe they did. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you'll have the clerk clarify for us further, but of course, Mr. Janice asked for the actual references from procedure and practices in Boston, Gagnon, I think, or wherever else there may be applicable standing orders. So we await that, but we understand, of course, that a dilatory motion is a motion designed to dispose of the original question before the committee, either for the time being or permanently. They do not require notice, or can they be amended or debated. If a dilatory motion is accompanied by a condition, then it becomes a substantive motion, and it's subject to the rules on admissibility, at which point it does become debatable and amendable. So perhaps the clerk can expand specifically on rule citations, as Mr. Jennis originally asked. And I guess we would also ask for an example of precedence in this regard, whether moving that a non-member be unable to speak has ever been voted on as a dilatory motion ever.
We will go to the other point of orders before we respond, because I think the clerk has provided that clearly in his remarks in a moment. We will go to Mr. Angus on the point of, okay, I just want to make sure, because I was, okay, so Angus, before we go to you, I'm going to go to Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order, then I'm going to go to you, Mr. Angus.
Well, further to that point, like on page 1065 is substantive motions, and a substantive motion is a separate self-contained motion, which I think Mr. Angus's motion fits that description quite well. It does not arise from another motion, which also fits the description, and generally a substantive motion is debatable and amendable. So it's quite clear based on the text found in the procedure and practice on 1065 that based on what Mr. Angus said, it fits the very definition of what a substantive motion is. Therefore, it is debatable and is not a dilatory motion.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Patzer.
That's correct,
and
yes.
that's what the ruling from what the clerk has provided to the committee, because the way it was phrased, the motion could not be placed in that fashion, and that's what the clerk did provide for clarity. I mean, that's why. So, Mr. Angus, I'm going to go to you on, you still had the floor on the point of order.
Thank you so much, Chair.
Or on, are you on the point of order, or are you
I'm
on?
just finishing because I've been interrupted multiple times. The issue is that, as you said, for us to make reasonable complaints about certain parties trying to bring in many members as possible, getting on, that there has to be some rule. The rule was that when someone had the floor, they could raise that as an opposition or objection. So I raised an objection. So a simple objection is that non-voting members not be allowed to be recognized. That's what I would go for. That's a simple, and that's within my right to ask. So that would be a simple dilatory motion.
Point of order.
So, Mr. Angus, you are correct in how that was placed. No, there was a difference on how the motion was placed. So that is correct on the motion you have placed. So, colleagues, that motion is correct and has been placed. We will proceed to a vote on
Point of order,
that.
Chair. What is the motion exactly?
So once again, Mr. Jennis, I have not recognized
Point
you.
of order.
You've turned So the motion is as follows: that non-members not be allowed to participate in the to be that non-members be not. So the motion is that members not be allowed to participate in, non-members be allowed not to participate in the public portion of our meeting That is what the members asked for.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
You had asked if I was on a point of order of the floor. I said I still had the floor, and I was clarifying that the motion is that the chair does not recognize non-voting members to speak. Simple and dilatory.
Colleagues, we will suspend for a few minutes. been presented. I'm not ready to rule on this today at this point. I will come back to the next meeting once we can work with the clerk to do a little bit more research on the specifics of what was moved and proposed to what can be. But so I want to be clear on that, just so we make sure we are correct in what we're doing. The clerk does need a little bit more time to go into the details and provide information to the chair. So I'm going to go back to Mr. Angus. Go ahead, Mr. Angus.
Yeah, I want to get back to the main motion, so I withdraw my motion.
Okay. So
It needs unanimous consent of the committee to withdraw the motion.
So do we have unanimous?
Well, yeah, sorry. I think you're getting to the point.
Do we have unanimous consent for the member to withdraw his motion?
Let's see first if there's unanimous consent.
Well, first I want to see if there's unanimous consent. Is there a point of order on that?
No, the question is put.
The question is put, do we have unanimous consent for the member to withdraw his motion?
We'll make our decision based on the procedural clarification.
Sorry, Mr. Janice.
Yeah, point of order. The motion is not moved unless you have allowed it to be moved. So a withdrawal is not required. The motion simply has not been moved. But just to say that you need unanimous consent to withdraw the motion implies that the motion has been moved, and you've said you haven't ruled that the motion could be moved yet. You wanted to suspend your determination. So I'm comfortable with Mr. Angus proceeding without the motion being moved, but I think it is an important point for the precedent we established
Correct.
that the motion is not being withdrawn. The motion was not moved, and therefore no unanimous consent is required.
Thank you, Mr. Janice, for your point of order on providing that. So, okay.
That's correct as an interpretation.
That is correct as an interpretation that you've provided. So, colleagues, we do have Mr. Angus. You still have the floor. So, and we still have time.
I'm done.
Would you like to conclude your remarks? You're done. So we go to the next speaker for.
Yes, we go to the next speaker.
Okay, we have a point of order by Mr. Dreeshen.
And I wanted to wait until Mr. Angus was finished. I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, because we've had some discussions with the clerk and so on, if we could hear from our clerk as to whether or not he's been informed by the head clerk as regarding the cross talk as to whether it is actually a health and safety issue, or is that a term that we are simply using because it seems perhaps logical to use? I want to know for sure what has, if there has been any discussion between the clerk and the head clerk with regards to that, because if we use terminology that is inflammatory, then I think that causes some grief. So I don't need to have the answer today. Perhaps the clerk could, but I would like to hear from the clerk at some time with regards to that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen, on your point of order. I'll just remind colleagues before I move to Mr. Bruson, who's next, and might be next meeting, Mr. Bruson. Thank you for your patience. That was raised previously, and this is for all members. So number one, it's for the interpreters to be able to interpret one individual speaking at a time, so it's clear for them to hear what's happening. But on a previous meeting, when asked, the interpreters did raise this as a concern. And I, as chair, want to make sure that everybody who works here in this committee is working in a safe work environment, and particularly for interpreters who are sitting doing a tremendous job in interpretation that is clear for them to hear, but they don't get a number of people at the same time because concerns previously have been raised. So I think I'm clear on that. If the clerk does get any more information that the clerk can provide me moving forward, we will bring that to committee. And folks, as we're approaching our time, thank you for working hard at today's committee, and thank you, Mr. Angus, for your patience and be able to conclude your remarks. We will proceed to next meeting with Ms. DeBrusen to start us off. So have a great day. The meeting is suspended.